There comes a point when you look at your own life and don't recognize anything anymore. Not because things are completely destroyed, but because something that once made sense has simply stopped working. And you can't explain it to anyone because on the outside everything might even seem normal. Inside there is emptiness, and this emptiness is silent, constant, and exhausting. It doesn't scream, it's just there. Every day, every moment you stop being distracted. The first thing the mind does with this emptiness is create a narrative. And this narrative almost always says the same thing. That you have failed, that you should be further along, that other people seem to know who they are and where they are going. And you are here, standing still, directionless, feeling that something is wrong with you. This is not failure. This emptiness has a name, and understanding that name can completely change how you interpret everything you are experiencing right now. Your nervous system is built to maintain patterns, not because it's limited, but because patterns are efficient. Every time you repeat a behavior, a thought, a way of relating to the world, the brain creates and strengthens neural connections. Over time, these connections become automatic. They form what you call identity. You don't think about who you are every morning. You simply wake up and act like yourself. And for a while, it works. It works because the identity you built was shaped to cope with the life you had, with the demands that existed, with the relationships you maintained, with the environment in which you grew up. Every experience you lived through left a mark on your nervous system. And these marks, over time, became a map. A map of who you are, what you deserve, what is possible for someone like you. The problem is not the map. The problem is when life starts taking you to a territory that this map can no longer describe. And then something very specific happens. It's not an immediate crisis. It's not a visible collapse. It's a silent emptying that begins at the edges of your experience and moves towards the center, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until the day you realize that you are completely present in your own life and at the same time completely disconnected from it. The things that once motivated you begin to seem hollow. Not fake, hollow, as if the content had been removed from them and only the form remained. You still do the same things. You still keep the same commitments. You still smile at the right times. But something that once existed in this movement, a sense of belonging, of direction, of meaning, is simply no longer there. And the body feels it before the mind can name it. The fatigue that doesn't go away with rest. That tiredness that isn't muscular, isn't physical. It's something deeper and more diffuse. The feeling of waking up already exhausted. Not from what you did, but from the constant effort of continuing to be someone you no longer know if you are. The difficulty concentrating on things that were once simple. The irritation that arises out of nowhere. The desire to disappear for a few days. Not to escape life, but to pause from yourself for a moment. This is not weakness. This is the clearest sign that your nervous system is trying to process a change that is greater than your current identity can handle. Think of it this way. Imagine an operating system running on a computer for years. It was installed at a specific time to handle specific tasks, and it worked very well for that. But at some point, the new programs that life demands start to become incompatible with the system running underneath. The computer doesn't crash because it's broken. It crashes because it's being forced to process something that the current system simply wasn't built to support. What appears to be a glitch is actually the beginning of an update. The emptiness you feel isn't a lack of purpose. It's the space that appears when one version of you stops functioning and the next hasn't fully arrived yet. This space is real. It's felt in the body. It's confusing. It's frightening at times. And it's absolutely necessary for any true transformation to happen. But here's what nobody tells you. This process isn't linear. There isn't a day when you wake up and the new version is ready, installed, and working perfectly. What exists is an overlap. For a period, the two versions coexist within you. The old one still reacts, still demands, still appears in your most automatic thoughts. And the new one doesn't yet have a defined form. It's still more feeling than certainty, more intuition than a consolidated identity. And living in that space between the two is what creates the feeling of emptiness. It is not devoid of meaning. It is devoid of form. It is the space where an old structure is dissolving and the new one has not yet crystallized. And in this space, without the anchor of the old identity and without the clarity of the new identity, the mind collapses in terms of reference. It no longer knows who you are, and what it cannot categorize, it interprets as danger. That's why emptiness hurts, not because you're regressing, but because you're in territory where your nervous system doesn't yet have a map. And walking without a map, for a mind that has been trained its whole life to follow known patterns, is one of the most uncomfortable experiences there is. You are not standing still. You are in a process that demands something from you that no one teaches you how to do, to continue existing while you yourself are being rewritten from the inside. And what makes this process even heavier is something that happens on an even deeper level, something that has to do with how your identity was built from the beginning and why it is losing coherence now. This loss of coherence doesn't happen by chance. Your identity isn't just what you think about yourself. It's a field, an energetic and neurological pattern that organizes how you perceive the world, how you react to it, what you believe is possible for you, and what you don't even consider as an option. This field has been built up over years, layer by layer, experience by experience, until it became so familiar that you stopped noticing it was there. It's like water to fish. You don't notice the field because you're inside it. It's the filter through which everything passes before reaching you. And for a long time, this filter worked. It organized information, created predictability, maintained a sense of continuity between who you were yesterday and who you are today. But fields change when the internal frequency changes, and something within you changed. Perhaps it was a specific experience. Perhaps it was a silent accumulation of small insights that came over time. Maybe you can't even pinpoint when it started. But at some point, something inside you began to vibrate at a frequency that the old identity can no longer sustain. And that's where the misalignment begins. The old identity doesn't disappear immediately. It resists because it was built to survive, to remain cohesive, to ensure you continue to be recognizable to yourself and to the world. So it fights. It appears in your most automatic thoughts, in the reactions you have before thinking, in the choices you make out of habit, not out of awareness, in the inner voices that tell you that you're exaggerating, that this will pass, that you should be grateful for what you have and stop wanting more. This resilience comes at a cost. When two incompatible frequencies coexist in the same field, the system becomes tense, and you feel this tension as a kind of constant contradiction. A part of you that wants to move forward and another that retreats, a clarity that appears at certain moments and disappears before you can act on it, a feeling that you know, at some deep level, who you are becoming, but you can't reach that version from within the identity that is still operating. It's like trying to wear clothes that were once yours. You remember it fitting. You have sentimental memories of it. But when you try to wear it now, it pinches in the wrong places, restricts movement, creates a discomfort that didn't exist before. And even knowing that the garment no longer fits, there's a hesitation to let it go. Because letting go of the old identity, even when it no longer works, means being momentarily shapeless. And that's frightening in a way that goes beyond rationality. The nervous system interprets the dissolution of identity in the same way it interprets a physical threat. Because for a mind that has been trained to organize itself around fixed patterns, losing the coherence of identity is neurologically similar to losing one's footing. The body responds with anxiety, with resistance, with that feeling of urgency without a clear direction, that you need to resolve this quickly, that remaining in this space of uncertainty is dangerous, but it isn't. The pain you feel in this process is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something is right enough for real transformation to be happening. Identities that never dissolve are never renewed. Discomfort is the sound of the field reorganizing itself. And there's something that happens in this process that most people don't realize in time. Something that, when you understand it, completely changes the relationship you have with what you're experiencing right now. The mind doesn't like not knowing. This is the point that changes everything when you understand it. The human brain has developed over thousands of years with a very clear primary function: to ensure its survival. And to ensure survival, it needs predictability. It needs to be able to anticipate what comes next, categorize the environment, identify threats, and create quick responses to known situations. When everything is in order, the brain relaxes. When something deviates from the norm, it goes on alert. And here's the problem nobody tells you. For your nervous system, not knowing who you're becoming activates the exact same circuit that's activated when you're in real danger. It's not a metaphor, it's neurochemistry. The body releases the same hormones, the same tension sets in, the same urgency appears, not because you're at risk, but because you're in territory that your internal map can't yet describe. And then the mind does what it always does when it has no answer. She creates one. And the answer she creates is almost always the cruelest possible. Not because her mind is her enemy, but because she seeks the most familiar explanation, the one already ingrained in her oldest patterns, the one repeated most often throughout her history. And for most people who grew up in an environment where making mistakes had consequences, where not knowing was synonymous with incompetence, where advancing slower than others meant falling behind, the most familiar explanation for emptiness is always the same. You failed, you're not good enough. You should have gone further. Look at the people around you. They seem to know what they're doing. They seem clear-headed. They seem to be moving forward while you're standing here, feeling an emptiness you can't even properly explain to anyone. And the worst part of this narrative isn't that it hurts. The worst part is that it seems real, because she uses her own memories as proof. She remembers all the times you started something and didn't finish it, all the times you felt you were about to change and ended up back in the same place, all the opportunities you saw from afar but couldn't reach. She builds a solid case against you, using your own history as evidence, and presents it all as irrefutable proof that the problem is you. This is the self-criticism loop. And it's so effective because it doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like an honest analysis. It feels like you're being realistic. It feels like you're just seeing things as they are. But what's really happening is that your nervous system, in a state of high alert, is filtering all your experience through a single bias, that you are the problem. Think of a concrete example. Imagine you're learning to ride a bicycle for the first time. You get on, lose your balance, fall. You get on again, stumble, fall again. At that moment, if someone told you that you're terrible at riding a bicycle, that other people learn faster, that maybe riding a bicycle simply isn't for you, what would happen? You would probably give up. Not because it were true, but because the narrative arrived at a moment when you were already vulnerable, already unbalanced, already doubting yourself. That is exactly what happens with identity in transition. You are in a moment of real imbalance. Not failure, but imbalance. And the inner voice arrives at this exact moment, when you are most vulnerable, and offers an explanation that seems to make sense but is actually keeping you trapped in a pattern that has nothing to do with who you are becoming. And there's one detail that makes this loop even harder to break. The more you try to convince yourself that you're not failing, the more your nervous system resists. Because resistance isn't logical. It's ingrained in the body. It's in the neural activation patterns that have been built up over years of repetition. You can rationally understand that you're in the process and still feel viscerally that you're sinking. This is not a lack of faith. This is the nervous system operating on an emotional baseline that was calibrated for the past, for the version of you that existed before this transition. And recalibrating that baseline doesn't happen with willpower. It doesn't happen just with repeated positive affirmations in front of the mirror. It happens when you start to change the relationship you have with the process itself, When you stop fighting the void and start to understand what it's trying to tell you. Because emptiness is not the enemy. He never went. Think of it this way. When you have a fever, the fever isn't the disease. It's your immune system's response fighting something. Fever is uncomfortable, sometimes frightening, but it's evidence that your body is working, that something is being processed, that a necessary battle is taking place beneath the surface. A vacuum works the same way. It's uncomfortable. It's confusing. It appears at the moments when you most want clarity, but it's not proof that you're broken. It's proof that your system is processing a change that's too big to go unnoticed, too profound to happen without cost, too real to be ignored. And here's what changes when you truly understand this. You stop wasting energy fighting the process and start using that energy to go through it. Because the difference between someone who gets lost in the void and someone who emerges from it transformed is not willpower. It's not discipline. It's not even faith in the way most people understand it. It is the ability to name what is happening. Naming has a power that goes far beyond the symbolic. When you give something a name, your nervous system changes the way it processes that thing. What was an unknown threat becomes mapped territory. What was chaos becomes a process. What seemed like failure begins to look like what it always was, a transition. And that's exactly what I need to talk to you about now. There is a word that psychology uses to describe what happens when a caterpillar enters its cocoon. Histolysis. It's the process by which the caterpillar's body literally dissolves from the inside. It's not a metaphor. It's what really happens. The cells that form the caterpillar liquefy, disintegrate, becoming a kind of shapeless mass, without structure, without a recognizable identity. If you were to open the cocoon in the middle of this process, you wouldn't find a caterpillar in transformation. You would find something that looks like total destruction. And it is precisely at this moment that the butterfly is being created. Not after the dissolution, during it. The butterfly doesn't emerge when the chaos ends. It emerges within the chaos. The cells that will form the wings, the eyes, the completely new body are already present in that liquid that seems to be nothing. They are already organizing themselves. They are already building something that the caterpillar could never imagine. Because the caterpillar never had wings, never had the experience of flying, never even had the nervous system necessary to process what it is to exist in a completely different way. The caterpillar doesn't know it will turn into a butterfly. All she knows is that the cocoon has closed and that something inside her is dissolving. And you're in that cocoon now, not in a poetic way, literally, in the most precise sense that this process allows. Something within you is dissolving. Old patterns are losing structure. Neural connections that supported a version of you that no longer exists are weakening. And new connections are being formed, slowly, silently, in layers that you cannot yet consciously access. This has a name. In neuroscience, it's called neuroplasticity in a state of identity transition. In spirituality, there are dozens of names for it. The dark night of the soul, the fertile void, the in-between, the threshold. But regardless of the name you choose, what is being described is always the same thing. The period in which an old structure has lost coherence and the new one has not yet consolidated. And this period has very specific characteristics that, when you learn to recognize them, completely change the experience of being in it. The first characteristic is a loss of motivation for old projects. Not laziness, not necessarily depression, a kind of selective indifference that appears specifically in relation to things that were part of your old identity. The goals you built from who you were cease to resonate. The energy that once existed in them simply vanishes, and you try to force yourself, try to find motivation, try to remember why it mattered, and you find nothing. This is your energy field reorganizing itself. The energy that sustained those goals is being redirected to the transformation process itself. It's like when a city experiences a power outage and the generators are activated to keep essential systems running. The decorative lights go out. The essential continues. Your motivation for what was superficial disappears because all the available energy is being used for something far more fundamental. The second characteristic is emotional hypersensitivity. Things that used to pass you by without leaving a mark now arrive with disproportionate weight. A song plays and you feel a longing for something you can't even name. A simple conversation touches you in a way that makes no rational sense. You cry for no clear reason, or feel an urge to cry that won't go away. You get irritated by situations that would have gone unnoticed before. This is not emotional instability, it's heightened sensitivity. Your nervous system, in the process of recalibration, has finer filters. It's absorbing more, processing more, and everything that enters is absorbed with greater intensity because the defenses that the old identity used to regulate emotional experience are more permeable. Think of it this way. Imagine you have skin that has been hardened by years of exposure. This skin protected you. It created a layer between you and the world that allowed you to function without being constantly overwhelmed. But at some point, this same skin began to isolate you not only from the things that hurt, but also from the things that nourish you, from what is beautiful, from what is true, from what is truly yours. And when that skin starts to peel off, everything becomes different. The pain intensifies, but so does the beauty, the connection, the meaning. You're becoming more permeable, not weaker. And there's a huge difference between the two, even if they seem the same inside. The third characteristic is intermittent clarity. You have moments when everything makes sense, when you feel with absolute certainty who you are becoming, what you want, where you are going. These moments are vivid, almost physical in their intensity, and then they pass, and you return to the fog. And the mind uses this oscillation as further proof that you are failing, that clarity was an illusion, that you cannot trust what you feel. But this fluctuation is part of the process. New neural connections don't stabilize all at once. They appear, strengthen a little, disappear, come back stronger, disappear again, come back even stronger. Each time that clarity appears and you recognize it, you are strengthening the neural pattern that will sustain the new identity. Each time it disappears and you don't collapse, you are training your nervous system to tolerate the space between versions without interpreting that space as failure. You are building the butterfly in the darkness of the cocoon. And there is a fourth element to this process that is the most silent of all, and perhaps the most important. Something that happens not in the mind, not in the emotions, but at a deeper, more subtle level, more difficult to describe with precise words. The landscape around you changes before you change. This isn't vague mysticism. There's a field of research that studies the coherence between a person's internal state and the patterns they attract in their external life. When your emotional baseline changes, when the frequency of your internal field shifts, what resonates with you changes. The people you encounter change. The opportunities that arise change. The conversations you have change, not because the universe has rearranged the world around you, but because you're picking up different frequencies, noticing things that were previously invisible, responding in ways that weren't accessible to you before. And this starts to happen before you even feel different, before clarity, before certainty, before you can say with conviction who you are now. The field shifts first. It's as if life signs begin to point in a new direction before you've built the identity that knows where you're going. That's why some things start to seem like synchronicities. You think of something and it appears. You feel an intuition and it is confirmed. You have a dream, and the next day some detail of the dream appears in real life. It's not coincidence and it's not superstition. It's your field recalibrating, capturing patterns that have always been there, but that the old identity didn't have the frequency to register. You're tuning up, like an instrument that has spent years slightly out of tune, producing sound, functioning, being used, but never reaching the exact note. And now, in this painful, confusing, seemingly shapeless process, you are being tuned, not by an external force that decides when you are ready, but by something within you that knows at a level deeper than the mind can access that the right note exists and that you are capable of sustaining it. Emptiness is not the absence of that note. Emptiness is the necessary silence before she can sound clearly. And what comes after that silence? What happens when you stop fighting the process and begin to learn to inhabit that space without destroying yourself is exactly what we need to explore now. Because there is a way to get through this that most people never discover. Not because it's complicated, but because it seems too counterintuitive to be true. The first thing most people try to do when they enter that space is to get out of it as quickly as possible. And that makes sense. The discomfort is real, the confusion is real, the feeling of being suspended between two versions of oneself without the firm ground of the old identity and without the clarity of the new one is genuinely difficult to bear. Then the mind goes into resolution mode. It starts searching for quick answers, techniques, protocols, anything that promises to transform chaos into order in the shortest possible time. You research, you consume content, you try meditation, journaling, therapy, courses, retreats, affirmations, visualizations. You wake up determined and go to sleep exhausted. You find a tool that seems to work for a few days and then the emptiness returns, sometimes more intense than before. And you interpret this as proof that even this tool didn't work for you. And the cycle begins again. Not because the tools are useless, but because you're using construction tools at a time that calls for something completely different. You're trying to build when the process happening within you is one of dissolution. And dissolution isn't the opposite of building, it's the prerequisite. Think of an example that everyone knows. When you plant a seed, there is a specific and inevitable moment when the seed coat needs to break. It cannot be avoided, it cannot be rushed. It cannot be replaced by any more efficient gardening technique. The shell needs to crack, the structure that protected the seed needs to dissolve, and only after this process, which from the outside looks like destruction, can the root begin to deepen and the sprout begin to emerge. If you try to strengthen the bark at this point, you will kill the plant. That's exactly what happens when you try to force yourself back into your old identity in the middle of a real transition. When you try to be productive the way you were before, when you try to feel motivated by old goals through sheer willpower, when you demand clarity from yourself at a time when the process requires the exact opposite of clarity, you are trying to strengthen the shell. And what the moment calls for is not strength. It's a quality that's much harder to cultivate in a culture that glorifies constant action, uninterrupted productivity, and visible, measurable growth every week. The moment calls for presence without resolution. This means learning to be in the void without trying to immediately transform it into something useful, without extracting a lesson from it before the lesson is ready, without forcing a growth narrative before growth has actually happened. It means developing the ability to sit with discomfort, not as a form of torture, but as an act of deep trust in the process that is happening within you. And that is radically different from passivity. Presence without resolution doesn't mean crossing your arms and waiting for transformation to happen on its own. It means learning to distinguish between action born from fear, urgency, and the need to control the process, and action born from coherence, intuition, and alignment with what is emerging. Action born from fear has a specific texture. She's frantic. She needs immediate results to justify herself. She can't tolerate the silence between one step and the next. She's always seeking external confirmation that she's working, and she burns out. Not because she's wrong, but because she's operating against the flow of the process, expending energy rowing against a current that's trying to take her where she needs to go. Action that arises from coherence has a completely different texture. She's slower, sometimes, less dramatic. She doesn't need to be seen to be real. She emerges from a clarity that appears not when you force it, but when you stop forcing it. It's that idea that comes to you in the shower, that conversation that happens at the exact moment, that decision you make not because you calculated all the variables, but because something inside you simply knew. You felt this before. That moment when you stop trying to solve it and the answer simply appears. That feeling that a door opened not because you knocked on it hard enough, but because you finally stopped pushing in the wrong direction. That's not luck, that's coherence. It's your inner and outer fields aligning at a moment when you lowered your guard enough for that alignment to be possible. And cultivating that, learning to create the conditions for those moments to happen more often, is the real work of this period. But what does this look like in practice? It's not abstract. It's not just a philosophical internal stance that sounds nice but doesn't change anything in daily life. It's concrete. It's the moment when you feel the urgency to make an important decision. And instead of acting immediately or becoming completely paralyzed, you learn to ask yourself, is this coming from fear or from coherence? Is this action trying to get me out of discomfort quickly, or is it moving me towards what is emerging? It's the difference between eating because you're hungry and eating because you're anxious. The behavior is the same on the outside. The origin is completely different on the inside. And the origin determines the result, not only immediately, but in the patterns you consolidate over time. Every time you act out of fear in the midst of a transition, you are strengthening the neural pattern of the old identity. You are sending your nervous system the message that the discomfort is unbearable, that it needs to be resolved immediately, that you are not capable of inhabiting the space between versions without collapsing. Every time you act from a place of coherence, even if it's a small, almost invisible action, you are building the nervous system of the new version. You are training your field to operate from a different frequency. You are, cell by cell, decision by decision, creating the neurological and energetic structure that will support who you are becoming. This isn't fast, and this is perhaps the most important thing you can hear today. The speed of this process is not a variable you control. You can influence it. You can create more favorable conditions for it to happen more smoothly, but you can't speed it up any more than you can speed up a fruit ripening on a tree. You can water it, you can ensure it receives light, you can protect it from pests, but ripening happens in the time it needs to. And there's a reason for that that goes beyond biology. The new identity needs to be solid enough to sustain the life it will create. A transition that happens too quickly, forced by urgency and fear, produces a fragile identity built on the same old patterns with a new story on top. It's the person who changes everything in their external life, moves to a new city, a new job, a new relationship, but carries the same internal patterns to the new place, and within a few months is exactly where they were emotionally before. Real change happens from the inside out. It is slow because it is deep. It is uncomfortable because it is true. It seems empty because it is building something that does not yet have a visible form, but which is being erected on a foundation that no previous version of you had. And there's a moment in this process that's unlike anything else. You won't be able to anticipate it. You won't be able to plan for it. It doesn't arrive when you decide you're ready or when you finally understand everything rationally. It arrives at any moment, sometimes in the middle of something completely ordinary, when you realize you're acting from a place you don't recognize as your old place. It's not a dramatic revelation. It's more subtle than that. It's a lightness that appears where there was once weight. It's a decision made without the exhausting internal negotiation that previously accompanied every choice. It's a conversation where you hear yourself speaking and realize that the words are coming from a truer, more aligned, more personal place than anything you've said before. It's the moment when you realize the butterfly has already formed. Not completely, not without scars from the process, but formed enough for the cocoon to begin to open. And when that moment arrives, it doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't need external validation. It simply is. And you know it with the kind of certainty that doesn't need proof because it doesn't live in the mind. It lives in the body, in the field, in the way the air feels different when you breathe within an identity that is finally truly yours. You're closer to it than you think. Not because I'm trying to comfort you with pretty words, but because the fact that you're here, listening to this, recognizing each part of this process in what you're experiencing, is already evidence that something within you is awakening. People who aren't in transition don't seek to understand the transition. People who aren't becoming something new don't feel the weight of leaving something old behind. The emptiness you're feeling isn't the end of anything. It is the sacred space where the truest version of you is being built, silently, profoundly, with a precision that your conscious mind cannot grasp, but that your field already recognizes. And when that version emerges, and it will emerge, you'll look back on that period that seemed empty and understand that it was the most fulfilling part of the whole process. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. And everything that is real leaves a mark. You made it to the end of this video, and I want you to pause for a second and realize what this means. Not in a performative way, not as empty praise, in a real way. You didn't get this far because you were bored. You got this far because something in the title of this video touched a specific place inside you. Because the words resonated with something you were already carrying. Silently, unable to fully name, unsure if anyone else understood what you were feeling. This recognition is no small feat. It's the kind of thing that happens when a part of you that was waiting for permission to exist finally finds a mirror. Not a mirror that shows you who you should be. A mirror that shows you who you already are, beneath everything you've accumulated, everything you've tried, everything that didn't work out the way you expected. You didn't come here by chance. This may sound like a cliche, but think about it concretely. Of all the available content, of all the directions your attention could have taken today, something brought you here. This search is not random. It is an expression of an inner intelligence that already knows you are in transition, that already recognizes that what you are experiencing has a name, a form, a direction, even if your conscious mind is still trying to process it all. The field is in, you already know. The mind is the last to arrive. And now I need to tell you something about the specific moment in which you are watching this. April has begun. Another month. Another calendar turn. And I know what happens inside many people at this moment. There's a hope that ignites almost automatically, almost involuntarily. A feeling that maybe this month will be different. That maybe now something will change. That maybe what didn't work in March, in February, in January, will finally find its way into this new cycle that is beginning. And along with that hope, almost always, comes a shadow. The memory of all the other month-end changes that also seem promising. Of all the beginnings that didn't last. Of all the times you felt that spark on the first day and watched it fade over the following weeks. Until you reached the end of the month in exactly the same emotional place you were at the beginning. And the question that remains, unspoken but felt, is always the same. Why is it different for me? But here's what I need you to understand before you close this video and move on with your day. The feeling of repetition you have isn't proof that you're stuck forever. It's proof that you're still trying to create a new life from an old identity. It's proof that the tool you're using to build the next chapter is still calibrated for the previous chapter. April won't change you, but the process that's happening within you, the one you recognized throughout this video, that's the one that has the power to transform not only April, but the way you inhabit each month that follows. Because when identity changes, the calendar stops being a sequence of beginnings that don't hold up and starts being a record of something that is being built in a consistent, profound, and true way. This is what changes when the transformation is real. It's not a good month followed by a bad month. It's a direction. A coherence that begins to appear not because you pushed yourself harder, not because you found the right technique, not because you finally had enough discipline, but because the version of you that is emerging in this process operates from a different field, from a different baseline, from an identity that doesn't need to be sustained by willpower because it is genuinely yours. And this April could be the month you stop fighting the process and start trusting it. Not naively, with the wisdom of someone who understands that dissolving is not destroying, that emptiness is not failure, that being between two versions of oneself is the bravest place there is, because it requires you to keep walking without clearly seeing the ground. You're already doing that. Each day you get through this period without giving up on yourself is a day in which your new identity becomes a little more solid. Every moment you choose curiosity over self-criticism, presence over urgency, confidence over control, you are building something that April is, and every month that comes after will reflect back to you. And before I finish, I want to leave you with a question, not to be answered now, not to be analyzed or resolved, to be carried, to be left open within you over the next few days, like a seed that doesn't need to be forced to germinate. It just needs space. That's the question. If the emptiness you're feeling wasn't failure, if it were exactly what I said it is, a recalibration process, a real transition, the necessary space between two versions of yourself, what would change in the way you're treating yourself right now? Let that question work on you. And if this content touched on something real, if you recognized yourself in any point of what was said here today, share it with someone who is also in that space between versions. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone who is suffering in silence is to show them that what they are feeling has a name, has a form, has meaning, which is not weakness, which is not a delay. That's the process. See you in the next video. And may April be the month you finally stop pressuring yourself to be exactly where you need to be.